screaming. Things like this don't actually happen. My daughters were normal yesterday. I picked them up from school, we ate dinner together, I tucked them into bed. When I went in their room this morning, they looked like literal walking corpses. They looked like they had been decaying for weeks. They heard the door creak as I peeked through the opening and they charged at the door. I closed it and tried to barricade it with anything I could. I screamed for my wife over and over again. I didn't get an answer. At this point I was sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know what was going on. My cell phone wouldn't turn on, and we don't have a landline. I took a deep breath and ran as fast as I could down the stairs. I could hear them breaking through their bedroom door. Once downstairs, I grabbed my wallet and keys and bolted outside to my truck. When I was finally driving down the road, I noticed that there were no lights anywhere. No street lights, no lights in houses. Absolutely nothing. I looked down at the time displayed on my radio, and it said it was noon. That couldn't be possible. It was pitch black outside. There was no moon, and there was no sun. Just darkness. When I looked back at the road, I screamed and slammed on the brakes. My vehicle stopped inches away from a little boy. He wasn't even looking at my vehicle. I hesitated. I thought back to my daughters and what had just happened at the house. Now, there's this random little boy in the middle of the road. I didn't want to get out of the truck. I locked the doors and decided that I would wait for the little boy to turn around and look at me before I stepped foot outside of the vehicle. He slowly began turning around, and I was relieved for a moment when I was able to see that the skin on his cheek looked normal. When he was fully turned around and looking at me, I saw the snot running from his nose as he cried. I unlocked my door and began opening it. Just as my foot was about to touch the ground, hundreds of decayed bodies charged at me and the boy. They were inhumanly fast. There was nothing I could do for him. I slammed my door shut and locked it right as those bodies began eating the boy alive. I covered my ears as his screams filled the otherwise silent air. I couldn't take it. I knew it was too late for him, and those things weren't human anyway, so I put my truck in drive and hit the gas. As I was driving through the crowd of corpses, I was horrified when I realized all of them were children. I didn't think my sanity could handle much more of this. I was running over decaying children. Suddenly, everything around me turned blood red. My headlights did nothing. It was almost like a glowing red fog, except there were no other colors anywhere, not even on the signs or buildings. Everything was solid red. As I scanned the area around my truck, I saw thousands of those zombie children just standing there, and all of them were staring at my truck as I drove. I knew that they were waiting for me to stop. I hadn't seen a single adult anywhere. It was almost as if I was the only adult in an entire town of cannibalistic children's corpses. I must be crazy. All of this is in my head. It's not real. It can't be real. My children are still alive. I need to wake up. As hard as I tried to pinch myself, the world around me stayed the same. There's no way out. I was determined to find other living people. There had to be someone else still alive. I couldn't be the only one. What better place to go than to the police station? There might be officers hunkered down in there. They have weapons. I do not. I could use their protection. I pulled up as close to the police department door as I could, and I ran full speed toward that door. When I tried to open the door, it was locked. Suddenly, the most deafening noise I have ever experienced filled the air. I can only compare it to a children's scream, but much higher pitched. I began getting dizzy and I could feel something warm running down the side of my face and down my cheeks. When I felt my face, I realized it was blood. I was bleeding from my eyes and ears. I was about to pass out when the door swung open, and I was practically thrown inside before the door closed and locked again. I looked up and saw a group of officers standing around me with their weapons drawn. They asked me how many screamers were out there, and I didn't understand what they were asking me. They then asked me if I had been bitten, to which I responded that I hadn't. I explained that I had woken up to find my rotting children in a cannibalistic state. According to the officers, they had gone through the same thing. They had gotten up for work and went to wake their kids up for school, and they barely made it out alive. They lowered their weapons after thoroughly checking my body for bites and scratches, and they began explaining everything. They said that the only adults they'd come across are men, and that the only people that turned into those things were children. I asked them why they were so worried about if I had been bitten if I wouldn't change into a zombie, and they told me that they would never stop hunting me if I was bitten or scratched. They would hunt me until they killed me. Once you are marked by them, they can track you. They smell you, they sense you. You can't escape. They will find you. Even if you die from some other cause, they will still track your body so they can consume you. My mind wandered back to the first question they had asked me about screamers, and I decided to ask them what that was. Screamers are children that are deformed, but not quite decayed. Their faces are disfigured, but from the right angle they look normal. They don't physically attack you, but they immobilize you with a scream that will make you bleed from your eyes and ears until you bleed out or until the other children find you and eat you alive. They told me that if they hadn't grabbed me and pulled me inside when they did, that I would have died from blood loss, or I could have started a feeding frenzy with my blood. I was horrified. All of this was sickening. The most innocent form of life had become the most gruesome and disturbing, not to mention dangerous and animalistic. Suddenly, the windows shattered and we were swarmed by the children. An officer tossed me a firearm, and we began trying to defend ourselves from the death we were facing. None of our efforts slowed them down in the slightest. One by one, the officers began screaming as the children's teeth ripped their bodies apart. Just as they bit into my flesh, there was a blinding flash of light, and when I looked around, I recognized that I was in my bedroom. My wife was sound asleep beside me. As I inspected the arm that had been bitten, I distinctly saw a scar in the shape of a child's mouth. I grabbed my phone and Googled obituaries for my county. I found each and every one of the officers. All of them had just been found deceased from an alleged animal attack. I woke up my wife and told her what had happened. She told me that I had been asleep next to her all night. When I showed her the bite-sized scar on my arm, she told me that it had come from one of our daughters. That's not what happened. Our daughters were dead. How did my kids survive, but the officers didn't? After my initial shock of everything I had just gone through, I started noticing small things about our house that weren't there before. For example, my wife asked me to paint our bedroom last year, so I had painted it lavender, her favorite color. Now our bedroom walls were pink, and according to my wife, it's always been pink. That's not all. My daughters loved animals, and they had begged me for years to let them get a kitten, so I did. His name was Boots. Apparently that never happened. We have a dog named Bones. But what startled me the most was that the names of my wife and kids were no longer the same. Their birthdays were different, their ages were different. Everything was different. It seemed like I was clinically insane. I tried to explain to my wife that her name was Grace, not Susan. I also told her that our children's names were Abigail and Olivia. She glared at me, and the bite mark on my arm started shooting pain through my entire arm. Nothing made sense anymore. It's like I was in an alternate reality. The pain in my arm gradually got worse. The more I insisted that things were wrong, the more excruciating it became. I stumbled to the bathroom holding my arm, desperate to find something I could take for the pain. When I looked up at the mirror, I almost dropped to the ground in horror. I don't know whose body I was trapped inside of, but this isn't me. This isn't how I look. I see myself every day. I know this isn't right. My daughters walked down the hallway and stopped in the bathroom doorway, staring at me silently until I turned my attention to them. They smiled and said, "Welcome home, Father." My kids didn't talk like that. They'd call me Dad, Pops, or Papa. Never once have I heard them refer to me as Father. If I had allegedly been here this whole time, why would they say welcome home? At this point, I didn't trust anyone. I was expecting my kids to turn into those zombie-looking things and trap me in the bathroom so they could eat me. Why do I even say it like that? These clearly aren't my kids. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw something standing behind me. It had the body of a man, but without many features. It had no eyes, no nose, and no hair. The smile on its face almost seemed to be put there with a knife for lack of better words. I was so mentally exhausted that I didn't even react. I waited for someone to take me out of this nightmare. What I didn't expect was for that thing to open its mouth wide and bite down on my bared shoulder, tearing my skin and flesh off of my body. It was the worst pain I have ever felt. I tried to get it away from me, but my body was weak. All I could do was watch it eat me in the mirror. I wasn't bleeding. With every chunk of flesh it ripped off of me, not a single drop of blood could be seen. I glanced over and noticed that my wife had joined those kids, and all of them were watching me being eaten alive. I must be in hell. I must be dead, and this is where I was sent. There's no other explanation in my mind. I closed my eyes tight and waited to die, but instead everything suddenly got quiet. When I opened my eyes, I was alone in a different bathroom. This definitely wasn't my house. I needed answers. The only thing I had been given was excessive trauma and confusion. I decided to try to find the front door and see if I could wander around outside for some answers to what was going on. That idea was short-lived. When I left the bathroom, it looked like I was inside of some sort of meat locker. I could hear what sounded like someone sharpening a knife behind a doorway with a curtain covering it. As I looked around the room, I noticed that this wasn't just any meat locker. It was a meat locker for people. There had to be dozens of corpses hanging from meat hooks. How in the hell did I even get here? Since there wasn't anyone who was able to visibly notice me, I tried to be as quiet as possible as I made my way for the door. I should have known not to get my hopes up that I was safe. As soon as I opened the door, my kids were staring back at me. Their heads were cocked to the side, and they were smiling wide. Without warning, their jaws unhinged, and they let out an immobilizing scream. They were screamers this whole time. That's when I heard something massive barreling towards me, and I knew it had to be whatever was sharpening that knife. I managed to turn around and see what it was. It was a 10-foot-tall man whose entire body had been stitched together. I didn't have enough time to fully process, but I swear I saw the same tattoos on this thing as the cops I met. That would have to mean that this thing had their arms and legs. It effortlessly picked me up and slammed me onto one of the empty meat hooks. Shockingly, it didn't hurt nearly as much as it should. I yelled at it that I wanted answers, and I demanded to know where I was. It laughed before looking me in the eyes and telling me that the life I once lived no longer existed. It said that I would be bound to this hellscape for eternity. I begged to know why. What had I done to deserve this? The only response I received was a machete through my stomach. For some reason, that didn't hurt much either. I tried everything I could to get myself off the hook. Nothing I did seemed to help. Slowly I began realizing that it was hopeless. My eyes scanned the room again, and I was horrified to see a pile of human heads in the corner. They seemed to be alive. I yelled out asking if anyone could hear me, and I got the chilling feeling of hundreds of eyes being focused on me. One of the heads replied, simply saying the word yes in a raspy voice. I asked why we were here and what had happened to them. It said we must feed the children. My mind put the pieces together, and I realized their bodies had been eaten. All that remained was their heads. That head must have read my mind, because without me saying a word, it said the word infection. That's when the massive man came back, and it angrily smashed the head into pieces with its foot. I was doomed. If this was being caused by an infection, that probably meant that there's no way to escape without a cure. But what the hell kind of infection makes these kinds of monsters? A zombie infection isn't surprising. But what are these other things? Who assembled the massive man's body? Is the entire world infected?